Hey guys! Welcome to the first episode in my new video series, Parliamentary California. I'm really excited for this day. I'm absolutely excited because I am a big advocate for parliamentary systems. I wasn't before, but I am now. And as you saw, if you followed me on Twitter and stayed up to date on my Twitter account, and also watched one of my videos, which was an hour long, where I did a book review video on Maxwell L. Stern's new book, Parliamentary America, where in his book he advocated for a parliamentary system for the United States, in which he advocates for enlarging the size of the House of Representatives to 870 members, in which they're elected through a system known as mixed member proportional representation. And then he also advocates for the House of Representatives to elect the President and Vice President of the United States, based on a coalition that emerges from among five party leaders in negotiating a majority coalition to ultimately form the government and elect the President and Vice President of the United States. And then he also advocated in changing the way we remove a sitting president instead of the impeachment rule, where he advocates for a vote of no confidence in the president where you at least need 60% of the full House membership to remove a sitting president based on a finding of maladministration. And if you want to check out that video, I'll check this video. Check it out in the corner of this video. Check it out in the corner of this video here. I recommend you highly recommend you read his book and check out my book review of Parliamentary America. It'll give you it'll add another mindset. It will get you to think about parliamentary systems and what you ultimately and make you understand maybe there's a better way to do democracy in the United States, and even in my home state of California, and even in your home states as well. This video series is it's been a long time coming for me. I wasn't an advocate for parliamentary systems, in part because I was still wrapped up in the minds that what the founders did in the what the founders accomplished and what they implemented. I used to have this false belief that the founders were gods, that the founders were perfect, because I originally was a conservative. I was originally a conservative Republican, in part because my parents were Republicans as well. And I hate to break it to you, I was once a Donald Trump supporter. I fell for his rhetoric. I used to support his. I used to support a lot. I used to support him as a person, and I did vote for him in 2020. But I will not be voting for him again in 2024. I think he's a threat to American democracy, and I don't support his policies anymore. In part because I think he's just in it for himself. I used to thought he was in it for the people, but I'm not supporting the guy again. But that's beside the point from this first episode in my new video series. Going back to this idea of how me being once originally a conservative Republican, I I was a big champion in the Electoral College and protecting the Electoral College. I think it's in part because Donald Trump won in 2016, and I saw and people such as Hillary Clinton supporters were demanding that the Electoral College be abolished and eliminated and going with a popular vote. And I was like saying, man, those people are just sore losers. I used to have that mindset. I really did. And I thought, these people just need to get over it. And I used to have this mindset saying, God, you really want to leave millions of Americans with no representation at all. You want to take away everyone's voice you want to take away everyone's voice by eliminating the Electoral College, which gives every state an equal say in the selection process of who becomes the president and vice president of the United States. I used to have that mindset. I used to have that mindset before, but then but there was at a point where I did advocate for like small reforms, like such as say advocating for reforms, simple reforms to the Electoral College that doesn't really change too much. I used to advocate for completely getting rid of the faithless electors problem and forcing faithless electors to cast their electoral votes for whoever won in the state. So that the electors have to vote based on what their population voted for in the presidential election that took place in November. And then throughout my years in college, I still supported the Electoral College, and I supported things like the congressional district method, where the system that Maine and Nebraska uses to allocate their electoral votes by congressional district. Because I thought that could be a little bit more fair. And then this is where I started to really get into this idea is maybe the Electoral College isn't a good system after all. Maybe it isn't a good system. Maybe it isn't. But I'm still kind of my beliefs of what the founders did was perfect, was still in my mind, but. So I still stuck with supporting the Electoral College, and then I started to advocate for a proportional allocation of electoral votes, meaning the number of votes each presidential candidate got in any of the state's popular votes determines how many electoral votes they get from that state. So if candidate A gets 60% of the votes in one state, then they get 60% of the electoral votes. And if candidate B gets 40% of the electoral votes, then they get 40% of the electoral votes from that state also. Because I thought maybe that can solve the problem in which where some people's votes worth more than others. Maybe that can create a good playing field where you're energizing more Americans, Republicans and Democrats, even independents, even libertarians, even Greens, support in which their votes ultimately go to the person that they voted for, in which everyone's votes can be counted equally. But then, and to be honest, maybe that would be a good system, because the problem with our current winner-take-all system of the Electoral College is that it forces presidential candidates to campaign in only swing states, in which people in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, and even Minnesota, Ohio, and Iowa, those people's votes matter more than my vote in California. Why? That's pretty true. Most presidential campaigns, there's no incentive to want to campaign in California and Massachusetts. California doesn't get any attention in general elections, for presidential elections. It's all about who wins those swing states, and presidential candidates spend a lot of their resources in swing states. And which means swing states such as Wisconsin and Pennsylvania get a disproportionate amount of influence in presidential elections, in which their voices matter more than my voice in California, or a Republican voter in West Virginia and Oklahoma. So, and that's one of the reasons why I used to support a proportional allocation of electoral votes. And then people were saying, national popular vote supporters were saying, well, if you're supporting a proportional allocation of electoral votes, then you should just go with a national popular vote, because a proportional electoral college is just a popular vote, just with extra steps. And then other people were saying, what would happen if no one gets the 270 electoral votes needed to win the White House, to be elected president and vice president of the United States? Well, then the vote goes to Congress to decide the president, in which the House elects the president and the Senate elects the vice president. And to be honest, that's when I started to open my mind. To possible reforms, and I started to understand maybe a proportional allocation of electoral votes wouldn't be a good solution, because, like it or not, the way the House votes for the president in a contingent election, if neither candidate gets 270 electoral votes, is undemocratic, because the House votes by state, meaning every state gets one vote when voting for who is the next president of the United States, which is undemocratic. It is completely undemocratic. And maybe a proportional allocation of electoral votes is not a good system anymore. And then that's when I pivoted and flip-flopped. In terms of in which I started not too long though, I slowly became an advocate for the national popular vote system, where I advocated for ranked choice voting through instant runoff voting to elect the president and vice president of the United States, because I thought that would be a more democratic system of governance. And then I started seeing people on Twitter advocate for parliamentary systems. I met this one guy on X, and he was advocating maybe a parliamentary system would be a better system of governance. And I was like, isn't that going against the founding fathers? Isn't that going against what the framers established, where they attended to combat the concern of factions, where they wanted to create a rock, paper, scissors constitution, where the president beats Congress, the courts beat Congress sometimes, the Congress beats the president, the courts beat the president, and so forth, to solve the problem in which the founders created the system to address the concern of factions. Isn't that going against what the framers established, which is checks and balances, separation of powers? And so I was still on the fence about parliamentary systems, and then I started to dive more deep, and I started to open my mind up to that alternative, and I started to learn more about parliamentary systems, and the one thing I also found out, that some of the framers actually wanted Congress to elect the president and vice president of the United States, and that was something new to me, and I slowly understood that the Electoral College was just a last minute compromise, because the founders were essentially just tired and wanted to go home, and they just agreed to a compromise, a temporary compromise of how the president and vice president should be elected during their time. It was a system that they agreed to during their time, but now it's not working anymore. And so, and it's exactly why I am completely on board with changing the way we elect our system, in which how we elect our elect our public officials, and how we elect the chief executive of our country. So that is exactly why I became a supporter of parliamentary systems, because I believe, listen, no government system or political system is perfect, but I believe parliamentary systems are inherently better than presidential systems, in part because I believe they offer more strengths than presidential systems. And I'll get to that in the first episode of Parliamentary California. And honestly, if we want to implement a parliamentary system in California, not just a parliamentary system in California, if we want a parliamentary system in the United States of America, we need to advocate. We need more people to advocate it, and we need to educate Americans and Californians and people and every American citizen what parliamentary systems are, and get them to spread our influence in saying maybe, and to persuade them maybe parliamentary systems are not a bad system after all. Maybe they're the key to creating a more functional democracy. Maybe it is a better alternative. So that is exactly why I became on board with parliamentary systems, and why I decided to create a video series of Parliamentary California, because I believe everything that Maxwell L. Stern advocated for in his book Parliamentary America. And so I want to spread this influence. We got to get the word out for parliamentary systems. And maybe at some point we can start an organization and a nonprofit to advocate for a parliamentary system in California, because I believe it is the gateway to a more representative democracy. And it's exactly why I started this video series, Parliamentary California. This is Parliamentary California. Before we talk about why a parliamentary system, why advocate for a parliamentary system in California, we first have to understand what is a parliamentary system. A parliamentary system is a system of government having the real executive power vested in a cabinet composed of members of the legislature who are individually and collectively responsible to the legislature. This means the government must have the support of Parliament for it to enter and remain in office. This ultimately means that the legislature plays a central role in forming the government. In part, you see, in most parliamentary systems, you have a governing party and an official opposition. Those two roles have different responsibilities. The governing party, the official opposition, that is something we already have in the United States. And we already have and we already know who the governing party is and who the official opposition is. But thanks to our presidential system, it makes it harder to figure out who to blame for certain issues. Do we blame the president, or do we blame the House of Representatives, or even do we blame the Senate? Because the problem with presidential systems is that one party can control the legislature and the other party can control the executive branch, which can create deadlock, and it can confuse voters it can confuse voters in helping them make the decision on on which to blame. Do we blame Congress, or do we blame the Senate? Do we blame House of Representatives? Do we blame the Speaker? Do we blame Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer? Do we blame Mitch McConnell? Do we blame Hakeem Jeffries? Or do we blame Kamala Harris? Do we blame Joe Biden? That type of confusion in presidential systems, which can create a lot of confusion. But that's beside the point. What I'm trying to make here. The overall point with parliamentary systems is that the legislature plays a massive role in forming the government. And as I said earlier, we already have some features of a parliamentary system right now in our current system. If we look at Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. So the governing party, the official opposition. The governing party is essentially the majority faction that is the biggest, largest faction in Congress. So in the House of Representatives, Speaker Mike Johnson, he and his Republican Party is essentially the governing party in the House of Representatives. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, he's essentially the official opposition holding the Republican Party accountable in the House of Representatives. And then you have the United States Senate. You have Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and then you have Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Chuck Schumer is essentially the governing party in the Senate, and Mitch McConnell is essentially the Senate minority, is essentially the official opposition in the Senate, holding Chuck Schumer accountable, ensuring that the government is serving the wants and needs of the American people and the citizenry of the country, or the citizenry of the country. But as I said earlier, those two factions, the governing party, which is the majority faction in the legislature, and the minority, which is the official opposition, they have different jobs. They have different responsibilities. Which ultimately sums up what a parliamentary system is, and how the legislature plays a massive role in forming and holding the government to account. You see, the job of the governing party, which once again is the majority party in the legislature, who has more than half the seats to be able to pass laws and implement policies, decide how taxpayer money is spent, and even appoint cabinet officials, and also appoint nominees to the U.S. Supreme Court and circuit courts. In which they make the decisions on who is appointed to serve in the president's administration. They make decisions on deciding how taxpayer money is spent. They make decisions. They ultimately make decisions on which policies to implement to solve the major issues that we all care about as Americans, that we all care about as Californians, whether it is healthcare, whether it is education, whether it is homelessness, gun control, the rising crime rates, mass incarceration, and so forth. Their job is to address the issues that every citizen of a country cares about. That's the job of the governing party or the majority faction in the legislature, to govern and make decisions on how taxpayer money is spent and which policies get implemented. That is the role of the majority faction of the legislature. That is the role of the governing party, and that is one cornerstone of a parliamentary system that already exists. That already somewhat exist in the United States, but our system's a bit more complex than that. And now let's talk about the official opposition's responsibilities. The opposition's role is to simply hold the government accountable. And they do this by simply asking questions, scrutinizing public officials. They engage in debates on the floor of the legislature. And they also criticize the government's approach. The idea of the opposition's role is to essentially hold the government to their words, hold them accountable, and to be an eagle eye on the majority faction, and to keep them in check, saying, we will hold you to your words. We will make sure that you are serving the citizenry of the country. And that is the big idea. That is the biggest point of what a parliamentary system is. That's the biggest point of what a parliamentary system is. The legislature plays a massive role in informing the government, informing and holding the government. Let me say that again. The idea of a parliamentary system, the overall idea of what a parliamentary system is that the legislature plays a central role in governing and also holding the government accountable. And they do this through the dynamic and relationship of the majority faction, which is the governing party, such as Speaker Mike Johnson and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, where Mike Johnson's job is to implement policies because he has a majority of seats in the House of Representatives, and Hakeem Jeffries is there to question and criticize the government's approach by simply asking questions and engaging in debates on the floor of the legislature. So the idea of the governing party and the official opposition is essentially the dynamic that we already are seeing in Congress. The idea of the majority faction and the minority faction. That is what a parliamentary system is. The idea is that the legislature plays a huge role in governing and holding the government to account. So, to wrap it all up, you may think that you might think that does fusing the executive branch with the legislature harm checks and balances? I can understand that point, but I disagree with it. I don't think it harms separation of powers. I don't think it destroys the principles of what the framers created, which is separation of powers. In part because the legislature represents the electorate. They represent the viewpoints of the electorate. As John Adams once said, is that Congress should be an exact portrait of the people. It should think and feel like them. It should represent the will of the people. And if the executive is fused with the legislature, in which he has to rely on the support of the legislature that represents the diverse viewpoints of the electorate, then the legislature is doing a better job in holding the executive branch accountable. They are doing a better job because the executive branch may control or tend to follow closely the legislative agenda, but the caveat is that he or she, whoever runs the government, being a prime minister, a federal chancellor, or even the governor of California, they have to periodically report to the legislative branch because they always need the support of the legislature to enter and remain in office. And that is what a parliamentary system is. A parliamentary system is essentially is essentially a system of government in which the legislative branch plays a central role in governing and also holding the government accountable. And that is done through the relationship of the governing party or the governing coalition, which is the majority faction of the legislature. And then it's also done, and it's also and then you also have the opposition's role, which is the party in the minority, whose job it is to hold the government accountable, which ultimately sums up the term what a parliamentary system is. And I define a parliamentary system as a system of government in which the legislative branch plays a central role in forming the government to ultimately decide which policies to implement, or decide how taxpayer money is spent, which people should serve in the executive branch's administration, and then the opposition's role is to hold the government accountable, to ensure that they are doing the people's business in governing and addressing the problems that we care about as Americans and that we care about as Californians. So the overall point of a parliamentary system is that the legislature plays a massive role in holding the government accountable, because the government must have the support of the legislature to enter and remain in office. In part because the legislature plays two roles. One in governing and the other in holding the government accountable. And that is what a parliamentary system is. So, now since we know what a parliamentary system is, why does California need a parliamentary system? There is several different reasons why I support a parliamentary system in California, and I will go into these reasons now. I think for one, in my opinion, California is a diverse state. It is home to 39 million people. There are conservatives, there are liberals, there are independents, centrist, moderate, Republicans, Democrats, libertarians, Greens, peace and freedom people. There are people that live in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, Imperial County, Bakersfield, Fresno, the Central Valley area, Sacramento, Northern California. California is a diverse and heterogeneous state. California voters are different. They have different values, different beliefs. And if a state is that diverse, if a state is large and diverse with a heterogeneous population, then a parliamentary system will suit California better to reflect the diversity of the electorate of every Californian, in which the legislature, California voters will elect the legislature, and on our behalfs, the legislature will elect the governor of California, in which the legislature will play a central role in governing the state and also holding the government accountable. And what better way to do that is through a parliamentary system, because California is a diverse state. It is home to 39 million people with different values, different beliefs, and different interests. We all have different ideas in California. And what better, and it's worth the while for us to implement a parliamentary system. So, another reason why I support a parliamentary system is that the top 9 most democratic countries are parliamentary systems. So, countries such as Norway, Iceland, Sweden, New Zealand, Denmark, Ireland, Canada, even though Canada doesn't have a proportional representation system, they use first past the post voting as what the United States uses in our elections for president and even Congress and gubernatorial elections. But I'm rooting for you, Canadians. I'm rooting for you to get rid of your first past the post votes. To get rid of your first past the post voting system in favor of a more proportional representation system to better represent how the electorate voted in Canada, to ultimately create a more representative parliament in Canada. I'm rooting for you, Canadians. I have faith in you that you will get rid of first past the post and adopt a proportional representation system. In those countries that have parliamentary systems, they rely on a system of multi-party democracies through coalition governance, which means those voters in those countries are generally more happier because they can truly vote their conscience. They are free to vote for the party that best aligns with their beliefs and best aligns with their values. That is the biggest strength of a parliamentary system with fostering coalition governance and multi-party democracies. Voters can truly vote for the government that they want. Speaking of which, this ties into my next reason. The biggest advantage of why I support a parliamentary system is that it will help us, is that it is another tool to build a vibrant multi-party democracy in the state of California. You see, the biggest advantage of a parliamentary system is that it does not marginalize losing parties that came in second, third, fourth, or fifth. Think about it. Imagine after the 2018 election. Just imagine after the 2018 California gubernatorial election. Imagine Governor Gavin Newsom's Democratic Party was elected, had it received a majority of seats. But the people that voted for John Cox and his Republican Party will still have representation. They will still have John Cox in the legislature, meaning they will still be represented in the government, which means that that John Cox and the California Republican Party can still hold the California Democratic Party to their words in holding them accountable to ensure that they are representing that every California voter, and they are addressing the issues that California voters elected them to do, whether it is addressing homelessness or making California more affordable and so forth, holding them accountable. The argument here is that it does not marginalize losing parties that got second place in the popular vote, that got third place in the popular vote, that got fourth place in the popular vote. Because those losing parties that didn't get a plurality of the vote or that didn't even get a majority of seats, they will still have seats in the legislature. They will still have seats in the legislature to still represent their constituents. And this leads me to my other point. It's easier for minor parties and the common folk to get elected in the legislature because of inclusive rules and lower barriers to entry. I've been saying this all along. I've been saying this for so many times. If third parties want to gain more prominence and want to increase their influence in U.S. politics, start at the local level. Start in your local communities. Start in your city governments. Start in your county governments. politics start at the local level. Start maybe in the homeowners association. Start at the local level and build a name for yourself. Build a name for yourself. Build a good reputation to the voters in your local communities, and only then can you increase your influence, and you will become a more successful third party. And it's why I support a parliamentary system, because it will make it easier for minor parties to get elected. In part because it is much more easier for the Libertarians, for the Greens, for the Peace and Freedom Party, for the American Independent Party, for the Common Sense Party, for the Forward Party, the Constitution Party, and so forth. It is easier for those parties to get elected in the legislature, because running for an election in a smaller district is much more cheaper and affordable, which means you are making it easier for smaller parties and minority candidates, women, and also low-income people to get elected in the legislature, because it'll be a lot less expensive to run for office. Because running for a smaller election is better. It is better for third parties because they don't have to spend a lot of money. They don't have to spend a lot of money at all. It will be easier for them to get elected in the public office rather than just running for a massive statewide race, such as a gubernatorial election, where they're literally going to have no shot at winning because no one knows them, because they didn't make a name for themselves in politics. And it's why I support a parliamentary. This goes into my reason. This reason right here of why I support a parliamentary system is that it will make it easier to build a multi-party democracy. You are essentially creating a positive political arena and a positive political institution to reward voters that vote for a third party. You're making third parties more meaningful in our politics, in which they will have a more positive role in forming the government. Let me think for a second. I've seen on Twitter a few days ago, the Forward Party tweeted this tweet, which was describing a poll in which 63% of Americans believe that a third party is needed. Well, that growing frustration of a third party, that growing need of a third party, that will not create a successful third party to emerge. The problem is embedded in the structures and institutions of our political system. You need institutional and structural change to ensure third parties have a meaningful role in helping to form the government. And what better way to do that is by creating a parliamentary system in California. Which means you are now rewarding voters that vote for a third party. You are empowering them, meaning they are more encouraged now to vote their conscience. They are more encouraged to vote their conscience and vote for the party that best aligns with their values and their beliefs and their ideas, because those parties will no longer be marginalized, because they will still win seats in the legislature, and to still represent those voters in the legislative branch, to still represent their constituents in the legislative branch, to ultimately represent their viewpoints and to ultimately help form the government. So this leads me into my next reason. The benefit of it maximizing inclusiveness and that facilitates the coexistence of multipartyism with fairer representation is that it will encourage cooperation among parties. Usually, most oftenly in most parliamentary systems, such as in Germany, and even Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, and even Finland, no party will have more than half the seats in the legislature to be able to govern alone, which means they are forced to form a coalition with other parties, mostly smaller parties, to get the votes they need to form the government. So usually they will, and how they do this is through coalition talks, by making deals with those parties to elect their party leader as prime minister or as the federal chancellor, which means those smaller parties will have greater leverage, or even third parties will have greater leverage in forcing the major parties to come back to the political center and saying, hey, if you want my constituents' votes, you're going to have to give me something in return in order for us to be your coalition partners. You're going to have to give us something in return. And this can be through either cabinet appointments in your implementing policies that we've been champions for a long time, allowing us, appointing our judicial nominees in the judicial system, and things like that. Those type of demands that the smaller parties will make is something that the major parties will do, are going to be forced to make to the smaller parties to be able to elect their leader to run the government and to appoint people to serve in his administration. It will take coalition talks through making deals with other parties. Party leaders will have to make deals with other parties to be able to form the government. And this right here empowers voters to vote for a third party. Voters will no longer be punished to vote for a third party. Meaning when they do cast their ballot in the election of the legislature to elect members of the legislature, and they do vote for a third party, those third parties will have seats in the legislature. Those parties will make demands. They will make demands to one of the major parties, saying, hey, we want, in order for us to be your coalition partners, you're gonna have to promise us something. You're gonna have to give us something in return, so that we can give you the votes you need to elect your leader as prime minister or as the federal chancellor or even as the governor of California. You're gonna have to give us something in return, and that type of cooperation is healthy for democracy because you are better reflecting the will of the people. You are better reflecting the will of the people. You are no longer marginalizing smaller parties. You are rewarding smaller parties because now, with voters being able to now vote their conscience and voting for the party that best aligns with their values, their parties will have greater leverage in negotiating with other parties to form a governing consensus that they can at least tolerate. And that's what a parliamentary system brings, and that's why I support a parliamentary system. And speaking of which, of how one of the benefits that encouraging cooperation among other parties can bring to our democracy is that it will lead to more intra-party unity. And I've said this earlier in the video, where the executive would usually tend to follow closely and control the legislative agenda. This means you will have greater consistency and continuity in government, which means which means voters will have an easier time to point fingers of who's to blame on a specific issue. Meaning, it's much more easier to figure out who is to blame, whose fault it is it. Whose fault is it that we're in this problem? Whose fault is it that this issue was created? Whose fault is it? Because now they can resort to the government. They can resort to blaming the governing party. They can resort to the governing coalition. They can blame those people now, and then they can vote for another party, whether it is in the minority faction in the next election, or if one party in the legislature calls for a vote of no confidence, and then push for a snap election to encourage the governing party to call for a snap election in which voters can vote for a new government, in which they are free to vote their conscience, and ultimately in which they're ultimately able to elect a better government that can do a better job at solving the issues that they care about. And it brings this type of greater consistency and greater continuity in government, because the problem with our current presidential system is that while that may lead to stability and less, which means decision making can be a lot faster, that can result in another problem. The problem with presidential systems is political deadlock. And what I mean by deadlock is that one party can control the White House and another party can control Congress, which means you will see more deadlock, which means nothing will get done. And we're seeing that right now. You're seeing a lack of consistency and a lack of continuity. You have the Republicans that control the House of Representatives, the Democrats control the Senate, and then President Joe Biden is the president. So the Republicans control the House of Representatives, the Democrats control the Senate and the White House, which means you have which means there is no consistency. There's no continuity in government. Because you have one party, being the Republicans, that want only citizens to vote, and the Democrats are not supporting it. I mean, some Democrats in the House voted for it, but a lot of the Democrat Party, they're not bringing it up to a vote in the Senate. What that means is there is less continuity and less consistency in government, which means nothing will get done. It's just going to be gridlock, and that's how bills die. And that is exactly that. And intra-party unity is another reason why I support a parliamentary system, is that it will lead to more consistency and continuity in government. And on top of that, the strength of intra-party unity is that party members will stay together and they will work towards a common goal, which means this will reward policy expertise. It will reward career politicians. Boy, I know the term career. I know those two words. Career politician is unpopular. Is an unpopular thing to say. I know it's unpopular because I know you people are tired of career politicians, but that's not necessarily, career politicians is not necessarily a bad thing, because who are the most experienced people in politics? Who are the most experienced people? I give you a second to answer that in the live in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds. Well, the answer isn't the president. The answer is not the vice president. The answer is not the governor of California. The answer is The people that are most experienced are the people in the legislative branch. People being congressmen, congresswomen, senators, state assembly members in California, state senators. Those are the people that are more experienced because they can stay in office for such a ridiculously long time that can surpass the president, which means they can get experienced. They can develop expertise on specific policies or specific political issues. They gain more institutional knowledge, and when they gain more institutional knowledge, they become not just effective lawmakers, they become effective policymakers as well. They become effective government officials, which means you are creating a more effective government. That is the benefit of that. And going back to this idea of parliamentary systems creating more intra-party unity with party members staying together and working towards a common goal, those party members in which they're constantly working towards a common goal in which they were first elected to do by their constituents, they will become effective lawmakers. They will gain more institutional knowledge on how to pass good bills, and they're also gaining great institutional knowledge to pass and implement good policy to improve upon the quality of life of all Californians and all Americans. And that is exactly one of the biggest strengths of parliamentary systems. That is one of the biggest strengths of parliamentary systems. It's the biggest strength. It rewards policy expertise. You will have less charisma in politics, less politicians running on charisma, less of that, and they'll be more based on, and it'll be more focused on. It'll be more. The debate will be centered more on policy. It'll be more policy oriented, more on the work they have been doing all these years in office, in striving for the very goals that they've set out to do when first elected in the legislature. They are becoming effective lawmakers, which means you are creating a more effective government that will better serve the people of California. So, the final reason why I support a parliamentary system is that it increases flexibility to remove a bad executive. If this party is not capable of action, I suggest new leadership is needed. I move for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership. Happy belated Star Wars Day. If you saw my book review video on Maxwell L. Stern's Parliamentary America book, you may get this Easter egg, but if you're a Star Wars fan, you may get it because I'm a Star Wars fan. And this goes into my final reason why I support a parliamentary system, is that it increases flexibility to remove a bad executive. This is in part because the head of government, being a prime minister, chancellor, and the governor of California, they would need to maintain the support of a majority of the members of the legislature to keep governing the state, which means a simple majority is sufficient to remove the head of government. This is in part because the head of government can be removed for simply political reasons through a vote of no confidence. I know a lot of countries do it differently. I know Norway doesn't do snap elections. In Germany, how a motion of no confidence works is that the opposition that's leading the no confidence motion, they would have to put in place a replacement candidate. In which, in case if a no confidence motion is successful, then you have to then you have to have a replacement candidate already ready to go to form the new government. And then there's other countries that use snap elections, such as what the United Kingdom does. I know. I think the Netherlands definitely do it. And in other European countries, even Israel, the country of Israel, uses snap elections also. But the overall point that I'm trying to say is the final reason why California should implement a parliamentary system is that it will enhance executive accountability. It's going back to this idea, the dynamics between the governing party and the opposition. The opposition's role is to hold the government to account, hold them to their words, and to be an eagle eye, saying we will hold you accountable, and we will make sure that you are representing the will of a majority of Californians. We are going to make sure that you are a fighter, that you are fighting for Californians, and you are fighting to solve the issues that every Californian cares about. That is the benefit of politics. That is the benefit of a parliamentary system. It enhances executive accountability, and I'm honestly on board with that. We've seen what a circus the 2021 California gubernatorial recall election was. Governor Gavin Newsom, he didn't have to run. He didn't have to run on his accomplishments. He didn't have to run on the positive work he's been doing. He didn't have to run on the policies that he's implemented and to persuade voters that he's doing a good job in governing the state. He didn't have to run on that. All he had to do was to rely on voters' fear, saying, "Hey, if you vote to replace me, you are essentially voting to replace me with Larry Elder, who is a Trump far right Republican, who will destroy our democracy in California." You are essentially saying you are essentially replacing me with an insurrectionist, as we saw on January the 6th. That is what Gavin Newsom did. He relied a lot on mudslinging and negative campaigning to still keep his job, and that is something that should never be an effective strategy. But it is under our current system and current winner-take-all system. In order to change that, we need a parliamentary system. We need institutional and structural change to enhance executive accountability. Leaders, if they want to keep their job, if the current government wants to keep their jobs in imposing their will on the people of their country, they should be forced to persuade them. They should keep it policy oriented, less about charisma, less about negative campaigning, and more about the positive work that they've been doing and why in persuading the members of the legislature that they deserve to be kept in power. And that is the biggest reason, and that is the final reason why California should implement a parliamentary system, is that it increases flexibility to remove a bad executive. This is why California should implement a parliamentary system. For one, California is a diverse state of 39 million people, a state filled with conservatives, liberals, farmers, urbanites, suburbanites, and so forth. And it makes it more the while for us to implement a parliamentary system. On top of that, the 9 most democratic countries are parliamentary systems. So those countries, such as Norway, Denmark, and Finland, People in those countries are generally more happier because they can truly vote for the party that best aligns with their values. 3, it's key to building a vibrant multi-party democracy, as voters are no longer punished for voting for a third party. As well, it encourages cooperation among parties. And on top of that, it rewards intra-party unity, as there will be more continuity and consistency in government in terms of the government control, usually in terms of the government controlling the legislative agenda, intending to follow closely the agenda set by the legislature, because the executive controls it. But the caveat is he has to periodically report to the legislature all the time. As well, it encourages policy expertise also. And finally, it increases flexibility in removing a terrible executive. And it's why California should implement a parliamentary system. Parliamentary California. It is a 7-episodic miniseries that will be me advocating for a parliamentary system in California, in which the state assembly elects the governor of California and all the other statewide executive officers except for the lieutenant governor, based on the partisan composition of the legislature, while not changing too much of our political system. It's a radical transformation. It's a radical departure from presidentialism. And that is what Parliamentary California is. That's what Parliamentary California is. It's time to think big, California. It's time to think radical. It's time to open our eyes, to learn from the experiences of others, of how they do democracy, and understanding that there are better alternatives to democracy. There are better ways to do democracy around the world. We just have to open our eyes and understand that there is no such thing as a perfect political system. It's all about learning from others, and it's all about embracing a diversity of opinion and respecting all people, because everyone has great ideas to reimagine a new California and America for all Americans. Parliamentary California is a dream that I want to see completed, because I am a strong supporter of a parliamentary system. It's not a perfect system, but it's inherently better from presidential systems. And I hope you join me on this adventure, California. I hope you join me. And those people who support parliamentary systems, if you want a parliamentary system in the United States, we need to raise our voices. We need to raise awareness and constantly educate more and more Americans on what a parliamentary system is. Present them this alternative to our presidential system. It's time, and that is what this video series is. It's to spread the word on parliamentary democracies to more and more Californians and Americans. In order for a parliamentary system to happen in the United States, we need to experiment with it. We need to educate others on what it is, and we need to experiment with it. Let's adopt our own parliamentary systems in our own home states. Let's adopt it in city council elections. Let's adopt it for the Board of Supervisors. Let's adopt it in every jurisdiction across the United States. Let's experiment with it. Let's experiment with it in our home states, in our local communities. Let's experiment. And if it works, it works. Let's experiment, because the states are truly the laboratories of democracy. The states are the laboratories of democracy to truly reimagine a more inclusive democracy for all Americans. Wyoming was the first state in the Union to allow women the right to vote. And then more states soon followed and joined Wyoming. And look what happened. The 19th Amendment was ratified. And look at now. The state of Maine was the first state in the Union to use ranked choice voting for a presidential election in 2020. And look what's happening now. More states are beginning to adopt it. Alaska just adopted it in 2022. Nevada could very well adopt it. Idaho could very well adopt it in 2024. Arizona might adopt it. And it looks like California is probably going to adopt it very, very soon. The states are the laboratories of democracy. It's like a domino effect. If the idea is popular enough, it will start in one state and it will go to another. It's like the domino effect, as I just said. Once one domino falls, another will follow, and another, and another. And then we have an effective democracy for all Americans and Californians. That is the argument that I'm saying. If we want a parliamentary system, we got to raise awareness and we got to experiment with this in our own home states and local communities. We got to advocate for this system, and we got to persuade state legislatures to adopt this system in our state governments and in our local city council elections and local county governments. Because it is the only way to get it implemented in the United States. Let's experiment with parliamentary systems across the United States. And that is what Parliamentary California aims to do. I will be sharing my own ideas. I know other people will have different ideas on how to run their own parliamentary system, and that's okay. But the idea is to spread the word on parliamentary systems. And that is what Parliamentary California aims to do. Let's get the ball rolling in urging our state governments to start advocating for legislation that will transform their state governments into a parliamentary system to ensure to get the states to start experimenting once more, to get them experimenting and experimenting with parliamentary systems. And if voters seem to like it and it starts getting popular, it will one state will fall, then more and more states will follow. One state will follow, one state will fall, another will, then another, and then another. And then the federal government will become a parliamentary system. That is Parliamentary California. It's a system built on proportional representation, coalition governance, executive accountability. It's time to depart from presidentialism. It's time to create a more inclusive and multi-party democracy for all Californians and Americans. And I hope you join me on this adventure to build a more inclusive democracy for all our citizens. This is Parliamentary California.